Relative versus absolute maximum and minimums.
So to find the absolute maximum is the highest point over the entire domain of a function or relation, and the relative maximum, the highest point in a particular section of a graph. The absolute minimum, the lowest point over the entire domain of a function or relation, and relative minimum, the lowest point in a particular section of a graph.
To help visualize this, we graph the function negative x to the fourth plus 4x squared minus x.
We would see that the absolute max is at negative 1.5 and 4.5, and that the relative max is at 1.3 and 2.6.
The relative minimum is going to be found at 0.126, negative 0.063. But here, our absolute minimum does not exist, or could be said that the absolute minimum is negative infinity. We can also determine the minimums and the maximums from the derivative of the graph. So let's find the derivative, which is f prime of x equals negative 4x to the third plus 8x minus 1. It's important to note that the slope of a max or a minimum is 0. So if we graph the derivative, which graphs the slope essentially, wherever the slope or the derivative graph hits 0 is where a minimum or a maximum is, which is evident here. Also, we could find the max or the mins by doing this algebraically. So what we would do would be to take the derivative, then plug in 0 for y, since we're finding where the slope equals 0. Then you would find that these are the points that you would come up with. And then we could determine the minimums and the maximums with the sign chart, such as here. So what we did here was took the derivative and then plotted our critical points along this line, found a value that was less than negative 1.473, for example, and then plugged that into the equation. And if our y was positive or negative, we mark it between the points. So then we did this for each of the intersections between the critical points. Then we could use the y values to determine the absolutes.
The values that have the highest y point are going to be the absolute maximum, and the values with the lowest y value is going to be the absolute minimum. And in this case, we don't have an absolute minimum because it is negative infinity.
Thanks!